So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Nina Kong-Surtees, founder and chief art legacy advisor of Smart Advisory. I'm so excited and honored to have a multidisciplinary indigenous artist, Mona Cliff, with us today. Honoring Native culture, Mona has continued to combine contemporary subject matters with indigenous crafting methods. In addition, Mona pursues the concept of generational knowledge while exploring the other topics such as Native futurism and identity. After graduating from Cornish College of Art in Seattle, Washington, Mona pursued beadwork to re-indigenize her practice after European-based art education. She learned to bead embroidery and sewing from her grandmother and continued to create regalia for ceremonial purposes for the past 20 years. Mona recently awarded and concluded a year-long public art grant through Art Place America and Lawrence Arts Center. Her public art focused on bringing visibility to the local indigenous community through art and celebration of Native American culture and community. First of all, Mona, thank you so much for being with us today. I'm so excited to hear more about your journey as an artist and your insights on the Native American culture that we're not really familiar with. Again, this is the art education doesn't really touch upon that. So I'm really, really honored and excited to share that with us today. And yeah, so first of all, I'm gonna pop up this image of your work. I'm gonna share the screen. And let's see, podcast. Can you see the screen, Mona?
Yeah.
Okay, do you see the image?
Yes, awesome.
I do. Yeah, so can you share us about what this work is and yeah, tell us about the process.
Okay, sure. Yeah, I'm glad to be here. Thanks for asking me to come talk about my work. I appreciate it. This piece right here is an evolution from my previous work where I created regalia that surrounds, the idea of like Native futurisms. So this is an evolution, and it happened, I created this piece during, the midway of the pandemic for an artist residency that I actually had to do virtually through the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe. So it's a university that's dedicated to, Native art, contemporary Native art, or all art forms and indigenous art forms. So I actually created this mask. My kids had just started school. It was during the pandemic, and I wasn't sure how this series was going to evolve because I had originally created dresses and a beaded QR code piece, and I know I was really heavily influenced, of course, by wearing masks all the time. And also, the news of just our, the current state of our world and climate change. And also partially my husband's work, who is a writer, and he, was describing an idea he had for a book, something way into the future. And so those were the main influences on creating this piece. And I was thinking about a person in the future, like, generations from now, and how they're going to have to navigate that space. And still be using these traditional techniques that were probably passed down through the generations. And so because seed beads are not something that we normally is a really traditional item or material that we used, because originally we would have used like birch bark or quills that come from a porcupine, leather. There's all these other traditional materials that we use to decorate ourselves and for self-expression. And then through trade, of course, with the, when the Europeans came and we started trading with them, then seed beads were introduced to us, as well as ribbons. And so that became the dominant form of self-expression with Native communities. And so that's kind of where that material is something that I heavily use is the seed beads. And so I started thinking about the future and like how this person would be using self-expression in this future, that's where our environment is, drastically changed. And how would they express themselves with the materials that they have, and or maybe what they're using. So I was thinking about an actual person, because in doing like traditional when all these last 11 years I've been creating traditional items for people in my community, when we create for somebody, we try to keep that person's identity in mind, like who they are in their spirit, in their persona. And so that's kind of where this piece had come about, but like a future person. So I don't know if that, that's probably as much as I have to say about it, other than like I applied the seed beads with a beeswax, a beeswax concoction that's using pine rosin and a little bit of petroleum jelly to keep the beeswax malleable. And then also the red that comes with that, the paint is actually a matte medium and also Oklahoma red dirt. So if anybody who's from Oklahoma, or when you go to visit Oklahoma, there are these like really vibrant patches of really super red dirt. And I've just loved those peaks in the landscape that you get of these flashes of red, and it's so earthy. And, I wanted to be able to tie this piece to the earth in some connection, because that's usually, when we create things, we're always, using and mining from what's around us. And so I wanted to connect this mask to the actual earth. So I just put the earth on there, and then smoked hide is the other part of that. So yeah.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I love it. I love the whole concept of like, first of all, you're talking about the evolution, not only your practice, but also I think the traditional evolution of like the in terms of keeping the tradition and the expression, the mode of expression in your community, right? You said, I love that you mentioned about the materials also evolve over time because of change of the time when the Europeans came to the States, and the new materials were introduced. So they were able to incorporate some new materials and like literally weave that into the traditional practice. I'm just curious to know, what about the mask itself? Is that like, did you recreate the mask using like it looks like wood to me, but I'm not sure from this photo, but like how, like the material wise, like the mask itself, is that made out of wood, or is that a repurposed item?
Yeah, it's I got it off Amazon.
Oh,
I had him deliver it. Yeah, I just searched, masks on there and just had him deliver it. So it's actually just already pre-made. And yeah, so I kept thinking about somebody who would be a healer, or someone who's versed in traditional medicines in this future. And then they, but they have to live and work using a gas mask. And what would be the mode of self-expression on that mask? And so that's kind of where the design elements come in, and how they move through their spaces, in this future. And the air quality is probably like really bad. I mean, we're already getting there. And so the actual lenses that you see with the clouds, that's photoshopped in, because this piece is actually going to be used in the advertisement for another show exhibit coming up. And they were wanting like higher resolution photos. And so the day that I was taking pictures of this mask outside, the sun was heavily filtered by the smoke, and that was really ironic to me. And so I had taken several pictures of the sky during that time, because it felt really eerie, you know, to see the sky the way it was, kind of like the smoke just kind of gives a tinge to everything. And we're in Kansas. I mean, like, how far away are we from the actual fires that are happening, and we're still affected in some way? And so that felt really, you know, I don't want to say prophetic, but it just felt really weird. So I photoshopped the lenses with that image of the smoke-filled sky in there.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah, actually the smoke actually traveled through all the way to New York City, because we had like moments where like it was like really foggy and it was covered in like smoke. It felt like a fog. But I also
Yeah.
love the fact that you were also weaving into the like looking back and dealing with the current situation and looking forward. So I mean, the title of it is past, present, and future. I mean, it's so apt, and it's so right on in terms of what we're going through. And I love that you also incorporate the environmental aspect of things, like literally incorporating, you said, the earth element to this mask. All right. And can you just like tell us a little bit more about that as like looking at future? Like now you're like looking at the past, and then now we're in the present moment, and now like looking into the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes from, you know, my own cultural background, because in a lot of my upbringing, we would hear all the time about how the 7 generation story, where, you know, our ancestors 7 generations ago had stories about what would be happening now. And then also this forethought from our ancestors about the choices that they make they always made choices based off of how it would affect 7 generations from now. And so as a mother, I think about my kids and then 7 generations from now and the things that are going to be happening in the future. And so I feel like kind of tying that together, like where we had come from, where we are right now, and then who's going to be preceding us, like who's coming next, you know, is something that's always kind of with me as I'm creating too. You know, I always think about my kids as kids and what type of world they're going to be navigating in the future, what information I'm giving to them, I'm passing on to them, and what they're going to carry with them. And so that's, you know, always, I feel like it might work into my work more than I know it does. It's more of an unconscious thing, but yeah, I really do think about them and the choices I'm making now. And then as a collective, like we should all be thinking that way. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people aren't taught to think that way. They're only taught to think about right now and their needs right now, as opposed to what the future generations might need. So yeah, that's always something. Sorry, there's a fly. So that's something that's always kind of in the back of my head, in the forefront of my head as I'm creating, you know, the first pieces that I had done, I had titled it Tech Traditions, and it didn't feel, the title wasn't, I wasn't vibing with that, and that's why I had you know, decided to change it. But it originally focused on, you know, identity and culture and how it's always evolving. And so that's something that I had originally based this work off of. And that's where generational knowledge comes into also, because as you see right behind me, that was the first piece that I had done. And I really wanted to kind of work my way through that information, and being a culture bearer and someone who is carrying these like traditions on, and where I had gotten my knowledge from, and then who I'm passing it on to. And so that's something that I had originally, when I had finally come back to my art practice, that's where I started at, was carrying these traditions on, because making regalia, and making ceremonial items is such a, you have to navigate that process like spiritually as well, you know, spiritually too, because you're creating something for someone that they carry with them. And that's how they are choosing to share their identity with people. And so it's a responsibility that we have, you know, in this knowledge also that we carry. And so right now there's this, you know, there's a resurgence that we're a lot of indigenous people are coming back to their language, or coming back to their plant knowledge, land knowledge, the knowledge of, these creating and crafting. And so being a culture bearer, you have to, now I'm navigating my art practice with carrying that knowledge as well. And so that feels like it's still a responsibility for me, even just creating art, because although I love to make things for people like moccasins and pipe bags and regalia, I needed to have more of a freedom of expression as well, because you can express yourself a lot that way, but I wanted to really break out. And then coming back into my art practice in 2018, I started with that generational knowledge, and I feel like the past and the present and the future is always something that's there. Yeah.
Amazing. It's really beautiful what you just said. It was just beautifully said. And yeah, I want to like commend you for like doing that and really thinking about the future. And I love the phrase you mentioned, that like the choice we make today is going to affect our future tomorrow. And like your artwork is also like has a power really to deliver that message, right? Like you're actually going through the past tradition, like bringing it to the present moment, and at the same time you're literally thinking forward in terms of your children's children. How are they going to get through any of the challenges that we're currently facing? And it's so important that I love the fact that you're also passing on this generational knowledge. And also I'm really excited to hear that it's being revitalized, the culture, because it's been so lost, right? Like throughout, if we look back even like a few hundred years ago, that we don't hear about this. It's not been taught in schools or generally, and now it's being revitalized. People are going back to their roots and saying, yeah, we need to go back in order to save the future, so to speak, and resuscitate that legacy. And yeah, just going back, I want to touch upon in your bio that like you had a traditional education where, like I mentioned, it's like very Western tradition, Western canon. And I want to talk about a little bit about your journey as an artist. So like getting out of that tradition. I mean, taking that tradition with you, it's not like you completely like deserted that practice, but you sort of managed to really get back to your roots, but at the same time like incorporating your education in your artwork.
Yeah, it was the education I received with my Bachelor of Fine Arts was amazing. Like I can't, discount it entirely, but it was heavily Westernized. And we learned about some Native artists. And fortunately enough, I had the experience of having an visiting artist. His name was James Luna, and he was doing amazingly progressive contemporary performance art based around identity. He was Luceño. Oh my gosh, he was Luceño and part Luceño and Mexican. And so I hope I'm getting that right for anybody. But his work really influenced me. And so I had the opportunity to spend time with him at our school. And I was really thankful and grateful for that opportunity that he was able to visit and kind of change how I view contemporary Native art, you know what I mean? And so that was really influential. And it was only like 2 weeks out of the entire 4 years that I was at school, and we did a little bit of art history, but it was just so, the ideas behind that, the ideas and the things that they were teaching us didn't make room for BIPOC people's experiences, and I really don't want to knock them, but it really didn't. They were kind of basing everything off of the standard, European idea about like what art should be, as opposed to, and that really frustrated me because the way I see it in self-expression and what art is, I mean, we're all mulling over what it means to be an artist and what art is, and everybody's pushing those boundaries always. And it really frustrated me to see the things that I saw being made in my own community being looked over, because the amount of work and mastery that went into it, and craftsmanship and self-expression, it speaks volumes for my culture, you know what I mean? And for it to be kind of glossed over, like, that's, let's put this shove it in its own little wing in the museum, or let's put it in its own little collection, and not stand next to these European art masters. That was frustrating for me as a Native person. It was my first time away from my family, by myself, and having to navigate living in the city and creating new connections with these other artists, and talking about what art is. And and at that time, we didn't have social media, so I'm dating myself. This was back when you heard the dial-up noise when you try to search the internet, and that's how long ago that was. And so everything that, the information we got was just in dribs and drabs, and so now with the surge of like social media and people advocating for themselves and being able to raise awareness about our issues, it's amazing time to live right now. I'm so happy to see this younger generation really advocating for themselves and to be seen. And I made art about mascots, about Native mascots, 20 years ago. And finally, 20 years, I mean, it was my just little art, but people have been wanting to make changes, and like having curriculums changed in schools, and just to be taught about, so that people understand, like, yes, we're here, but you got to understand who preceded us. And we've largely been left out of that conversation. So a lot of people still have this really antiquated idea about like who Native people are. And we have a thriving culture now. We're, finally just being able to be seen, from, being able to speak for ourselves finally, without having people dictate the information that should be shown about us,
Absolutely. Like, I totally agree. And I love what you said about that. Like, it's like, fortunately, we're at a great time, right? Like with this technology, if we're using it right way, right? Like we could advocate for ourselves, and we could educate others about something that's been dormant for so long, right? I mean, like, don't get me wrong, it was nothing wrong with the knowing about like the European tradition, but I think, yes, like now the time we're in a moment where things are shifting. Now we're like saying, yeah, like we kind of like forgot these other communities, and we need to really go back and re-study them and bring them forward. So I think, like I'm so like fortunate that we could use that technology towards something greater, and also educating the future, right? Like it's also that it's gonna reshape their future, like what we make, the
Yes.
choices we make, and that's gonna actually hopefully shift in a greater movement.
Yeah.
I also want to touch upon like, in some ways, technology also is helping revitalize, right? You said that people are going back to their roots, and do you think it's like has to do with the technology? Like, why do you think people are suddenly going back to their roots nowadays? I mean, it's been forgotten, or some people might have abandoned altogether, right? And now sort of they're going back. So what do you think is contributing to that revitalization of the legacy?
I think influencers really play a big part on that, and what they're sharing, the content that they're sharing via social media is hopefully, I mean, and I'm seeing this resurgence, but back in the 70s, kind of right around when I was born, was the American Indian movement that really kickstarted that reclaiming our identity as Native people. I mean, even though I can't speak for everyone, but it was a Kickstarter to kind of sharing with everybody else in the world and kind of reclaiming our identities again, because even further back prior to that. You know, we all had just come off of the whole boarding school thing where, you know, they were trying to take those identities and our culture away from us. And so there was a generation of people who really tried to shy away from that, from being Native or being seen as, you know, not everybody, because there was people who were in small pockets living on the reservations who were quietly sharing the knowledge and carrying on the knowledge within their own families or smaller communities. And so, you know, going into the resurgence in the 70s with the American Indian movement, they, you know, really kickstarted another generation, which is me too, to like really be reclaiming our roots and reclaiming our identities and culture, and having that access to be able to practice that too, because it wasn't until the year I was born that Native people were actually able to practice our own religion on our own land without being persecuted. Literally, there was a law that was that prohibited us from practicing our own not religions, our spiritual faith, you know what I mean, and our spiritual traditions. And so it wasn't until that year that I was born. And so that really also kickstarted, you know, in a whole new revolution of people being able to practice freely without persecution. And so those things really had set up where we are today. And then the added part of the social media, and now the influencers of younger generations who were raised by people my age who lived in that time. So as you see the progression of how things, like how people influence each other throughout the generations and how important that is, you know, to think about those future generations and what we're doing now, you know, so that really all ties together. And so I see that like resurgence. And I think that, you know, of course, technology has a huge, and you know, ability to we were able to share this knowledge now. So like we're talking now here, you're over there and I'm over here, and like I have access to information. And unfortunately, sometimes the wrong people can get a hold of that information, and things can get exploited. Like, you know, the sage that we use is being over harvested and being used by practitioners who may not fully understand the knowledge that comes along with using those sacred medicines. And so we're seeing things get exploited as well because they have access to this information. So it's a double, you know, sided coin, or a double edged sword. You know, it's like there's this information that's out there that needs to be preserved, and it is in a larger sense being preserved throughout the generations, but then other people have access to it. So that's the other downfall about that. And you know, we all have different viewpoints, and unfortunately, enabled to, you know, I personally believe that enabled, you know, to go forward and move forward as Native people, we really need to start coming together and come to a consensus about what we need from the world at large. You know, how we need to agree about, like, what are we going to call ourselves? What are these protocols? You know, everybody kind of has their own ideas about things, but, you know, I feel like that's why Standing Rock was so important, because everybody was able to come together, and it was such a huge thing. And it was because of social media too, that played a huge part in that, all these different tribal nations coming together, and kind of speaking as Indigenous people as a whole, you know, about what we need from everybody, and what people should be listening to us about, you know what I mean? The information that we hold, and how we should be listened to. It's important, you know? Yeah, so I don't know if I answered the question, but.
No, I think you brought up a lot of really good points. And like, yeah, technology is great, but like, again, it has both good and the bad sides. I mean, in any situation, any given situation, things do get exploited. And once like people kind of see, oh, there's like some potential, right? And or like monetary potential, like to make something, or right, like
Yeah.
It's like, or becoming popularized, right? Then like people sort of like exploit that idea. And I'm not promoting that, but it's just like sometimes that's the reality, right? Like, so we have to really take the responsibility, right? And really educate, giving people the right information. And then it's just navigating that space where, you know, like you play a huge, I mean, definitely important and a big role and big shoes to fill in terms of continuing the legacy, right? As an artist, right? And your messaging is like included in that, right? Like your practice, your messaging, and it's like big responsibility and big shoes to fill. And I want to touch upon, so what's the most rewarding and challenging part of being an artist? Like I said, you do have a really big responsibility, not just for as a art as a career, but within your community.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Well, for me, as an artist and being a mom is really challenging. It's balancing that life, those two, they're separate lives, I feel, but they also, they are separate lives, but they also influence each other. And so for 11 years, I was only a stay-at-home mom, and I focused on traditional arts because it wasn't as taxing as trying to have a career in the arts. And I just kept feeling that pull to continue on with my own practice. And so, yeah, 2018 is like, I just decided, like, go for it. I put myself out there. And it is a responsibility too, I feel, because just within my own community, you're putting who you are out there and your experiences out there as an artist. You know what I mean? When you create stuff, it's a culmination of everything, all the experiences that you've had and how you feel about the world. And so, being just one voice, I don't like to say that I'm speaking for any other tribes, or, I like to just kind of, I don't know, say not generalize, but I'm like just a general voice. I don't know how to say that either. But yeah, it's a challenge in all aspects, of being a Native woman, being a mother, trying to find my own artistic voice as well, after just coming back to my practice and such, short years recently. That's something else that I'm constantly questioning, like, what is it that I want to say? And I feel like my vision is starting to focus a little bit better, but I'm still all over the place. I have a lot of reactionary pieces that I make, political pieces that I make, that are on, you can see it on my social media. And I decided to kind of shift my gaze to uplifting and visibility of Native people. And that's especially right after I did that public art project. I felt like we can and that's kind of an environment that's created also by social media, is that we're constantly in this reactionary mode. Like, this just happened, oh my gosh. And then it's just these ebbs and flows of everybody getting upset about, there's something or another, like people say. And so I realized that I kept joining that roller coaster, and I was like, I can't keep doing this. And so I decided to kind of shift my priorities as a person and as an artist on visibility and uplifting our communities, and creating art that people will hopefully resonate with and makes them feel proud about, being seen, you know what I mean? Because I felt like for the longest time, I didn't feel that. I guess when it comes to contemporary art, and like I said, with James Luna, he really made me feel seen as a person, because I also navigate those issues of identity because I'm Native and white. And so, like, there's something that I'm always constantly having to move and understand. And it's been a lifelong understanding about where I belong. But then I'm like, I belong in neither place, but I do belong in both places at the same time, in these different communities. And how do I navigate that as a person in my own personal way that I see identity? So there's so many issues that I try to work through, and being a mom, coming to my studio is my sacred space. You know what I mean? I try to make it a sacred space. When I come in here, I have, try to focus my intention. I light incense to kind of focus my intention and the music that I listen to, so that I can kind of get into this space where I'm able to just focus on whatever I'm making and what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So that's just some of the things that go through my head. Just a few.
I love it. I also appreciate you for sharing that with like the challenges with us. I know it's not easy to balance motherhood and your career and also like navigating through the identity, right? Like I
Mm,
think, something that like you're also like questioning and also expanding. And I feel like you already been exploring a lot of areas in terms of like finding like your voice and your messaging. I think, like I said, you know, artwork is never done. It's always evolving process. And like you mentioned earlier, it's your work is constantly evolving. And like I said, you have a very significant role to play. I know you're not trying to like cover every single community, but you're
yeah.
creating awareness and bringing visibility to not just your particular community, but everyone else that's involved. You're like inspiring people to say, yes, like this is my heritage, this is my culture, and I'm proud to share that.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really big thing you're doing, is that inspiring by shifting instead of reacting to all
Yeah.
these things that's going on social media. I know it's so easy to get fall into, but
Yeah.
I'm really happy that you are actually like shifted and moving towards more um brighter and inspiring aspect of your art practice and your culture and your community.
Thank you. Yeah. It is I was riding those waves for quite a while, and I was like, okay, yeah, just it is, you have to, there's a self-discipline and not getting caught up in everything else that's going around you. And I do care deeply about these issues, but I can't keep jumping on that roller coaster,
No, no.
and the especially with my public art project, and I only did a small mural. And I wanted it to be, I know a lot of people shy away from the use of pan indigeneity, but there are cultural items that we all use that they're widely used in the United States by most Native people in their regalia. Like there's this one called the kokum scarf, or like it's a floral scarf. It's actually from like Scandinavia, but it's really popular amongst our culture.
Oh,
And so I used that as a background for my mural because I knew that most Native women would immediately recognize the floral scarf pattern, be like, yes, that's me. I have one of those. And so that's the type of way that I want to uplift, especially like Native women, because my grandmother, she's such a huge influence on who she really truly believed in me. She kept these old sketches that I had from a long time ago. So even when I was even like a kid and a teenager and just kind of doodling around, she kept those because she really truly believed in me. And I really, and of course she was the one who showed me how to do beadwork, and she showed, and showed me how to sew. And so a lot of these things that I've made to help my own family and my community further their spiritual journeys, that's also plays such a huge part in what I create now, and helping people just feel like that connection and identifying with what they're seeing in front of them. So yeah, like as an artist, I just try to convey that, especially with my women shields. I'm like looking at one right now. It's sitting in my studio. The evolution from what this was originally into, there's an evolution to that woman shield because I, started really abstracting the womb form, and I started realizing how much of a shield it looked like. And so that's when I started creating
mm.
those shields as well, and like kind of personifying them and thinking like having a person in mind as I created it. Um, and so I want women to identify with that maybe, and hopefully help like them heal if they see those things, that they feel kind of like a sense of healing in themselves, and acceptance of who they are, and in themselves. That's what I want too. I want that for myself. And I think that's in creating those items and helping, hopefully. I was just putting that up on my social media because I love plants and I love plant knowledge and I love all of that knowledge that goes behind healing with herbs and healing with those plants. And so like, I'm trying to figure out a way to really incorporate that into my practice as well. Like, how am I going to get this? And I did it a little bit with my public art project, where I included the botanical renderings of the different plants that we use that are native to this region. And so just constantly going through learning and trying to acquire that knowledge of plant knowledge and healing medicines is another part of my practice that I will incorporate. It will become a part of what I'm doing, like, more.
I love that. Again, like, I think you also play, like, your art also has like a powerful role in healing. And I love that you mentioned earlier about like the spiritual aspect of not just your tradition, but also like in your work, right? Like setting an intention and also like embodying that spirituality and elements into your work. So in that sense, like, I think definitely art has power to heal and plays a role, you know, in our culture, society, and even like history. So I want to also touch upon the, like, what was the best advice you received, or any advice that you would have given to yourself when you were starting out as an artist?
If I would have given myself advice a long time ago, I would have been like, I would have told myself, don't be hindered by other people's expectations of you. I would have said, just do you, girl. Don't be afraid to be you, and you know, let yourself shine. That's what I would have said, because I was so self-conscious as a young person, and what I should be doing versus what I want to be doing. You know what I mean? And I think that's something as women we have to really, across cultures, navigate, like, what our responsibilities are to our family and our community versus what we really want to do. And I think that, you know, there's an expectation placed on women a lot of time to live up to these roles that are placed upon us. Like, we don't ask for it, but it's also something that comes natural. And so I'm learning to embrace that too, because I love to, how do you put it? Like, I love to tend to people, you know, I do love doing that. Like, I love to tend and care, and like, those parts of me as a woman and a mother, it's like, that's what I'm learning to embrace, that it's okay. But also at the same time, it's like, I wish it wasn't completely placed on me. Like, I could just be free, you know? So those are the other things that those are the other parts that I'm having to navigate and learn and work through, you know, accepting, you know? And so, yeah, like, there's just so much I could tell myself when younger, but then at the same time, if I hadn't have lived through all of these things and made the choices I made, I wouldn't be who I am today. And so I needed to go through that turmoil in order to, like, grow as a person and really work through a lot of the issues that I faced as a woman, as a Native woman, and now as a mother, because I didn't have kids until I was 30. So I did all the, and then there's all this other parts of, you know, being a human being and working through dysfunction and working through all these other parts that we have to all navigate as people. And I don't think that the responsibility of my artistic voice, I don't think would have come through as much if I hadn't been a mother first, and really understand that tending and caring, and, you know, in order to, like, reclaim myself, to know that I need to take care of myself too. I know that sounds strange, but it's like, I'm always putting everybody first, you know, and I love to do that. But then I'm like, whoa, you need to back it up a minute, and you need to start focusing too on yourself as a person, because you can lose yourself when you do that. You really can. And I know that a lot of women do, you know, and it's not a bad thing. It's just something that I think comes natural to most women. I can't speak for all women, but you know.
I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. Like you again, like you touched up on very good point. And I think we're slowly unraveling the traditional expectations of like being a mom and having a career. I think that's all like been coming up recently, especially with the pandemic, right? Like
Yeah.
juggling, career as well as family. And at the same time, I mean, I know I could definitely tell you are like really giving and caring person because I already, we already connected. I felt that. And sometimes we have to give ourselves the time and reclaim our energy. It's not a bad thing, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes the society say like you have to do it all, but at the same time, like you can't give it from an empty well, right? Like you can't
Yes.
give from an
Yes.
empty, like if you're empty. So it's so important to, we forget that, right? It's like so important to like work on ourselves, whether self-care, whether it's just even taking a break. I mean, I could
Mhm.
definitely relate to that because I'm also a mother and I know it's been a challenging to balance everything, right? Like try to take a break, but at the same time, you feel guilty because like
Yes.
if I take a break and but again, it's like yeah, it's actually interesting that motherhood, although I'm not saying it's dismissing it's easy, but I think it's teaching us a lot about ourselves as well as like you know our family and the community. So I'm glad you
Mhm.
actually brought that point. This is such an
Yeah.
important point and reminder that yes, like we need to take care of ourselves first in order to take care of
Yeah.
others around us. So I love that
Yeah.
aspect of that.
Yes. Yeah. I totally feel, yeah. I mean, all of these years that I was just focusing on motherhood, and I wanted it to be that way because I knew that once I wanted to start going towards trying to have a career as an artist, that there would be a pull. And so navigating that, like I keep using that word, but I just constantly feel that like navigation might be a new theme in my work coming up because
Oh, I love that.
it's like,
I can't
how are
wait.
we navigating? Yes, like how do we navigate? What influences us, but I didn't want those those two things to pull at each other because I knew it was going to be an effort and a challenge. And so that's why I had held off on pursuing that. Plus the space, we didn't have much space, we just moved in. So we just moved into this new house and like I have space now to be more and have an actual space of my own and create that because I was literally creating from our dining room. I like took over our dining room. I was like, you guys don't eat at the table anyways. And like it would just, a lot of people's dining room tables. We just lived in this really tiny space and like I ended up taking over the entire dining room and then so like we literally would just only eat in the living room. So that was me physically reclaiming myself in a way, environmentally reclaiming who I was by saying like I need this space to create. You guys, I'm sorry, but you guys need to like give me that space. And so now I have my own little studio and I have my own little part away and like my kids can be inside and um but yeah, like physically taking up space is, and a whole gives a whole new meaning to reclaiming yourself too, you know?
Absolutely, absolutely. Again, also like I love that you mentioned, like you said, clear boundaries, right? Like physical
Yeah.
boundaries. In your
Yeah.
case, it was like literally physical boundaries. It's like this
Yeah.
is my space. So, I mean, it's so important, and I think as women, we forget, right?
Mhm.
And it does have a toll on us time to time, like whether it's like energy levels or even just like our work, like because we're giving so much. Um,
Mhm.
Constantly giving versus like giving ourselves the permission and time to really like reclaiming ourselves. So I really appreciate sharing that and
Yeah.
also a reminder. I'm also curious to know what's your definition of success? It's different for everyone, but in terms of yeah, uh, your definition.
I know. Oh my gosh. I think about that all the time. I
I love
really,
it.
I really go through through what it means to me, and if I'm living up to my own expectations of what success are, but like defining it, I know that there's different modes of how people define success, and like maybe somebody would think like, oh, it's if I have a show at this really prominent gallery, and of course that's something to shoot for. I think when I started this journey, I was also toying with the idea of going to get my master's degree. And that's actually why I came to Lawrence back in 2004. There's a Native university here, and my sister was attending. And, so I thought, well, I just got out of a bad relationship. I'm like, I'm going to go start my life over again in Kansas. I'm going to go to school, and then I'm going to get my graduate degree in art or something. And then, of course, I got off track, had kids. I mean, that's not being off track, having kids. I got off track of what I was originally intending to do. I fell in love, and it's like, okay, let's put aside everything I want for this, and so I did, and it was okay. I was happy to do so, you know what I mean? And so when my kids got older and they were able to like dress themselves and eat, make themselves food, they didn't need me as much. And I thought, okay, this is when I'm going to pursue what I want to do again. And I toyed with the idea of going back and not going back, but getting my graduate, going to get a master's degree. But I knew that was also going to be a pull, between what I need to do, my expectations I have for myself and being a mother, and then also what I want to follow as a person. And my husband was getting really frustrated with me because I was like, I don't know what I want to do, like, constantly. And he was like, you need to, and he didn't say it in the nicest terms, but basically you need to choose, like. And so I decided that if I wasn't going to get my master's degree, I was going to pursue opportunities that would be equivalent to getting a master's, so, and then once I made a shot in the dark in applying for public art, and I really didn't know what I was expecting. And then that really transformed how I see art too, in being able to affect where you're at, you know what I mean? And so once I went through that, that really changed a lot in like how I see what is successful to me. And I guess for me now, being successful would be like uplifting my community. It's as simple as that, like being able to see the joy in my community and seeing themselves in the city that they live, and reside, and that's for me success. And I want to continue that. So I want to continue uplifting Native voices. And so like, if I need to apply for those grants, that's what I want. Like, I want to be able to get to be funded to do that. You know what I mean? I know that we live in this world where everything revolves around capitalism. And so it's unfortunate that, I do want to try to find ways, like mutual aid ways, where we can all come together and like, create for our community as well. So I'm trying to work through how to do that. So yeah, that's a long answer. Sorry.
Oh.
But is also just making a name for myself, and being that voice of almost opposition to what other people expect Native art to be like, like breaking those expectations of what people are expecting of us, and there's a narrative going on right now that's being created by a lot of artists that I'm like, okay, let's move past this idea of like who we are as antiquated people. You know what I mean? We're thriving contemporary people with a thriving culture. And that's what I want to bring forth, So I don't know if that's a really
I love it.
Is, but
No, that's a beautifully said. I mean, there's no wrong or right answer. Again, it's all based on up to you. It's not based on, like this definition of success is usually it's external factor, right? Like it's based on like what our society expects us to do, but everyone deep within, like everyone has different definition of success and what it really means for them. And I think you answered really beautifully in terms of uplifting your community. I think that's really a powerful message, and it doesn't have to be complex. And
Yeah,
you have it
yeah.
right. You just said it, and I think it's really beautifully said. And I think we really need to expand on that. On that note, what is next for you in terms of your project? Do you have any upcoming projects that you want to share with the audience?
Well, I just finished a commission for the Kansas City Museum. They're currently going through a huge renovation of the museum. And so I luckily got to be a part of that based off of my community and putting my name forward. And so that was a responsibility. I felt like, man, I better show up for this. So I really put my heart in, and I really had a breakthrough, I felt, when it came to my seed bead practice. And I've been wanting to push those boundaries of how we, how I apply seed beads, and wanting to break into more the dimensional ways of applying seed beads. So I'm just finishing off that, coming off of like a 6-month working towards finishing this commission, which is awesome. So it's been a great breakthrough, but now I get to return back to my previous work that I had put on hold. And so the next steps for me, and hopefully getting funded too, is to work on a large installation for the gas mask. So making full-on figures for the gas masks, and that's going to be really involving for me, because I'm hoping to use video, projection, and if I can even swing a way to get smell in there, I'm gonna figure out a way
Wow.
to have like a smell. Like, I'm gonna figure out some way, because it's such, for me, like smell. I'm always sniffing everything, but like smell plays such a huge part in, and was like, what is it, olfactory, like memories, and how it affects us, and I love, just how music and sound and like these experiences can immediately bring you back to somewhere. It's like a way to time travel without like literally going there. But then if you get into that whole other part, like about realities and like, para realities or whatever, it's like, well, what if we are time traveling? I don't know. Anyways, I'm getting off track, but like, so I'm going to be creating a installation, hopefully, and a larger installation surrounding the gas masks, and continuing that work of past, presence, and future. So full on installation, hopefully. Yes, no, not hopefully, I am doing that.
I
So,
love it. I love it. And
yeah.
we can't wait to see it. We can't wait to see it. And lastly, how can people connect with you? What's the best way to people to connect?
Instagram, 100%. That's usually where I'm most active on Instagram. And then my website, I try to steer people towards my website, but I'm most active on Instagram. And yeah, that's where I share all most of my work and my process. And yeah, Spotted Cloud. It's really cool because that was the name my grandmother gave me. So, and it's a
I love
family
it.
name. Yeah, it's a generational name. So,
Oh,
yeah, like, so that's my Instagram name is Spotted Cloud. And so, yeah.
I love it. I love it. Now we're out of time. We could have gone on and on about
Yeah.
this, but I really want to thank you for sharing your journey and like educating us about the Native American culture. I'm sure, like, I mean, again, like this is also a learning experience for me coming from the traditional education. But I'm sure the audience feel the same way in terms of, like learning about the culture even more, from your work, because like I said, your work really weaves into, literally weaving into the traditional and as well as the contemporary subject matter. And that brings out a lot of messaging in terms of identity and culture and preservation of our legacy. So in the long term. So I really
Yeah.
appreciate your time and being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right on.
All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I will tune in until next time. So see you.
Bye.
Bye.